And we're live again. We're live. So, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, anyone watching live now or later. And before I introduce my guests, I want to give a shout out to the people that listen to the audio version of this podcast on the many different platforms, because I am really overwhelmed by the response that the podcast is having. And I want to give a shout out to all the listeners in, here we go, the US, Australia, Brazil, Sweden, UK, Spain, not me, Russia, Colombia, the Netherlands, Canada, Israel, China, Saudi Arabia, Germany, Ireland, maybe Susana, United Arab Emirates, Bangladesh, Switzerland, Finland, Japan, Sri Lanka, Macedonia, Malaysia, Poland, and Slovakia. So all those people around the world listening today. So thank you very much, everyone listening through the different podcast platforms. And it is my absolute pleasure to be joined once again by my long-term partner in crime and coolest name in fantasy writing, Susana Imáginario. How are you?
Hello, doing well. Thank you for having me again.
Always a pleasure. And the one and only Dr. Goodwyn. How are you?
Great to be back.
I was checking, it was 5 months ago that we were talking, and for anyone that hasn't done so, I have left a link in the description below to our previous conversation and my review of Dr. Goodwyn's fantasy novel, debut novel, King of the Forgotten Darkness. And since last time, I think you've been moving up in the world. Isn't that right?
I mean, a little bit.
A little bit. So what's your actual job title now?
Well, I'll actually be taking on a new position as a medical director in Cody, Wyoming. That's my next job, my day job.
Right. And then in the night, how's the sequel coming along?
Now I'm working on it. I'm working on actually, I've had a plan for multiple novels in this setting. A couple of them actually I've already written. I just chose to start with this one because it's the beginning, but other ones I've already written.
Right.
In the Raven's Tale series. But it is a standalone. The King of the Forgotten Darkness is a standalone.
Yep. Brilliant stuff. Right. But today we're going to talk about mental health, and who better to discuss this than with your good self. So I've got hopefully some quick fire questions, because I've got some curiosity about certain conditions, certain things, and then we can try to unpick how real or unreal or the myth around them. So I think I know the answer. We all have a capacity to learn, or we can train our brains and we can learn new things. And there's the whole nature versus nurture debate. But we are not all born with the same brain, are we?
Right.
That's correct, isn't it?
Well, I mean, we all have human brains, and they have a lot of similarities, but there's also a lot of differences, sure.
So a bit like, we don't have the same body. Some people are more naturally gifted for sports. Some people, from the moment they're born, they may have slightly higher capacity to learn more neural connections, something like that, right?
Mm-hmm.
Right. A bit controversial, maybe, but is there a difference? Because I've got a friend who's a gynecologist, and he's told me some research that from the moment they're born, babies, male and female babies, perceive things differently on brain scans they've done on newborn babies. Is that the case?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there are quite a few differences that are observable from in utero following the first surge of testosterone that you see in, say, a male versus female.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Then we go into the good stuff. Right. What is a psychopath?
Okay.
It escalated.
Yeah. That was my slow build up.
Okay. So psychopathy as a trait varies across the spectrum. From most of us, like just any sort of normal distribution, most of us are kind of in the middle in terms of how much empathy we have, how much we care about other people and what they think. And then a psychopath, I think, would be someone who measures very highly on the psychopathy scale. And those are people that just do not have very much empathy, if any, and so they don't really care. I mean, they are aware that things that they do may harm other people. They just really don't care.
Right, and this is all points on a scale, obviously.
Yeah, yeah, and funny enough, there's actually people that measure very far away from that, but we don't talk about them very much because those are people that care very deeply about what other people think. And so we tend to not notice them because they're not causing a bunch of ruckus like the psychopaths are.
But they take on a lot of, say, angst from what other people may feel, right?
Yeah, that's right. So their problem is they care too much, and they have to, like in therapy, you would want to work on someone as like creating boundaries around themselves so they don't overextend themselves constantly and feel excessive amounts of guilt. Psychopaths don't feel a whole lot of guilt. Now, I want to add though that these are predispositions. There's a strong genetic component to this, but it's not inevitable or immutable. And certain things that can happen in your life can push you in one direction or the other. So, like all things, it's complex, but yeah. So there's a person who is has a high level of psychopathy can learn to be empathic towards others with therapy, for example. It's just whether or not they're going to bother coming in to learn such things, because they tend to not think that anything is their fault. They blame everyone else for their problems.
Right, and could they pretend to care about other people?
Oh yeah.
Look at that smile. For anyone not watching now, you've dealt with a few of those, haven't you?
Oh, maybe one or two, yeah.
Maybe one or two. Fantastic. You had to come back. You had to come back to the podcast for all the stories. Anyway, so what is a sociopath, or is that a synonym?
It's a synonym. Yeah. I mean, some of this is just terminology that has kind of gradually morphed over the decades as psychiatry has changed.
Right.
Yeah.
Carrying on then, someone who is schizophrenic,
Mm-hmm.
was at least the people that believe there's a conspiracy around them, they're being chased by sick. I had during my teacher training course, I was with a group of student teachers, and a girl one evening had she had a breakout. She thought that we were all in on some kind of conspiracy because
Mm-hmm.
we were leaving the school that we were training at, and she thought that it was all a test to sort of to check how much we wanted the job. That
Mm-hmm.
we were going to be given jobs at the school, but the fact that we were leaving or pretending to leave as she saw it was testing how much she wanted the job, and she wanted to talk to the head teacher and tell her that she wanted the job and that she knew what was going on. And when you encounter someone like that, all of a sudden, it was really weird.
Yes,
And
it is.
the only way we could get her out was to go along with the fantasy, because it was the only way to get her moving and go home and then seek help. Was that the right thing to do?
Yeah. I think really that's a good thing to do. Because if it's a true psychotic break, then the delusions are going to be extremely resistant to logic and reason. And so what they really kind of need is to get help, to get medications, and that's a challenge, because a lot of times they don't know that they're ill. They don't know that what they believe is delusional. And that's something I see all the time, of course, too.
Right. And within that, can we add on things like anorexia, vigorexia, people that have like a self-perception issue? Is that all kind of lumped into that sort of thing?
Anorexia can get to, when it progresses, if it progresses enough without treatment, it can get delusional level of intensity. It starts off as this sort of belief that they're fat, that they're ugly or whatever it is, but it is amenable to discussion. But if you let it go for a long time, and they of course they starve themselves, and so the brain actually starts getting brain damaged, and one of the consequences can be that they get to just absolutely delusional levels. It's very sad. So it's a really tough illness.
Right. And I need to ask this following question, and I don't mean to be controversial. I know it's a slightly hot topic these days, but I honestly ask from a position of ignorance and wanting to understand. Gender dysphoria, is it the same as this kind of self-perception conditions? I don't know what's the word for it, illnesses, whatever the right term is. Is that a similar sort of mental disorder, or is it genuinely a thing where you have a female brain trapped in a man's body, or the other way around?
It's more the latter. It's more what we know about, say, transgender individuals is that there is an associated level of shifts in hormones in the uterine environment that's strongly correlated with that presentation of gender dysphoria. These are individuals who, as children even, will say that they feel like the other sex, or they'll gravitate towards more opposite genders, coded type of behavior and play. Mm-hmm. Now there is another type that's called late onset gender dysphoria, which is quite a bit more controversial and seems to center on like social media platforms where people will, for whatever reason, suddenly start to say that they have gender dysphoria and they're transgender and all that. And there's a lot of debate right now about whether or not that is the same, even in the same class as the former type that I just described there, where that's kind of more classic transgender, where you've kind of always known that you are in the wrong kind of body.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that's a sticky one. That's a challenging one.
Yeah. And like I said, I don't want to be controversial. I was just like, from my ignorance, I was thinking that, just like anorexia or bigorexia or people with self-perception issues, where the gender dysphoria was kind of like a similar type of condition.
Well, and there seems to be a strong cultural component to the late onset versus the early onset. There doesn't seem to be a whole lot of cultural impact there. They just know, and they're very adamant about it. Anorexia is very sensitive to cultural variables, and there's like studies of countries that didn't have a whole lot of access to like westernized media. Then once it was brought in, all of a sudden you see all kinds of anorexia. And so obviously the criticism is, well, it's media portrayals of body, types is what's encouraging this sort of thing. And I think that's probably true. There's a big component of that.
Right. Sorry, Susana, have you got any questions of your own?
Questions, more opinions. I have some experience with anorexia during my 20s, my early 20s. I was anoretic, but it wasn't so much. I wasn't influenced by, the beauty standards. I was always pretty skinny. It for me, it started as it was all about control. I felt that I was out of control. I was at the stage in my life that I didn't feel that I had control, and it was kind of a knee-jerk reaction to that. I could control what I eat, so what I put inside my body, and it took me years to realize that, because it was easier to blame, the supermodels. They don't exist anymore, but back in the 90s, it was the cult of the supermodel.
Yeah.
So there's that component.
Yeah. Oh, well, it's a very complex situation, and that control is absolutely a big part of it, of course.
Right. And then, so I guess I kind of know what your answer is going to be now, but are some of these particular, the cycle, let's go extreme, because that's what, we get to see in the media, the movies and comics and books and stuff, these just psychopaths, just sociopaths. Are there some cases where they are so extreme that they're not treatable?
That is a prominent opinion in the literature, and that they are there are cases that they're just so psychopathic that they are untreatable. I mean, that's definitely an opinion that's fairly well supported. I haven't. That's a type of patient you see more in the forensic world, and I don't do a whole lot of that. So I've run across them, but maybe not the extreme ones.
Right. And so I think at some point, I think it was it certainly happened in Spain. I'm not sure about the US or Susana, Portugal, Ireland, but I think at some point, mental asylums closed down. Like it wasn't, for whatever the reason, all of a sudden locking away people that are mentally not well and potentially a risk to themselves or other people. It just was not okay to put them away in asylums. Is that the situation in the US as well? And if so, was that a clever decision with hindsight?
Well, in the US, we used to have people who would stay for months to years in asylums, but they funded those systems a whole lot more. And in the 70s and 80s is when it really started to change. And they had this community mental health model that shifted to try to get people out of the hospitals and not so institutionalized. That was the idea. And they said, well, okay, well, let's take some of the funding for these long-term facilities, shift it to the community, and support them in the community. Which they did about half of that, the first half, and not the second half.
Right.
In my opinion, anyway, that's kind of the perception I see. And so we still have the idea and the pressure to get them out of the hospital for long-term stays, but then it's tough to get what they need on the outpatient, outside world, It's a lot harder.
Is that the same thing in Portugal and Ireland, Susana?
I have no idea in Ireland the state of affairs in that department. In Portugal, I think they still exist. We just call it psychiatric hospitals, and there are some conditions that the person does need to have constant supervision and medication. So it's easier and safer to have a place dedicated to that. The family can't. They don't have the skills, don't have the time to cope. But now that I think what changed was the stigma associated with many of mental illnesses, because before it was almost taboo to talk about it. Even just talk about depression, people would kind of shy away from it. And now people they talk about it a lot. There's new mental health issues coming up every day, and sometimes it's almost like they are proud of their issues. They list all their problems. I don't know. Okay, everyone needs hobbies, but yeah. I think it's just a little bit too much. We don't need to know everything that is wrong with your mind.
It's a fair point. Right. So just want to move on then to a topic, and then Dr. Goodwyn. So what's your reaction when we see in the portrayals, particularly in movies, of those mental asylums with the sort of the Victorian ones with the electroshock therapy and all that? Was that a thing? Was that real?
Well, yeah. So in the Victorian era, yes, there was still like dipping people in ice baths and electric shock and chaining people to walls and all that kind of stuff. Now, the funny thing about that is that the media seems to think we're still there. Like I've been watching the Penguin show.
Oh yeah,
I've seen that show, and the part where she's in Arkham, it's ludicrous what they put her through. Like nobody does this kind of stuff at all. And I realize it's fantasy and it's Arkham, so like it's supposed to be corrupt and completely backwards and everything. But I just couldn't help but roll my eyes when they were doing electric shock therapy. Like electric shock therapy is a current therapy that we use, and it's extremely effective. But depictions like that keep people from it. And they're like, no, I'm not doing that. That's totally insane, And of course, like they didn't, she wasn't under anesthesia or anything. They just like took the paddles and zapped her right in the skull. And like, come on, who does that? That's insane.
So actually, so electroshock therapy is still potentially a thing.
Oh yeah, yeah.
But what would be the Dr. Goodwyn prescribed methodology, not the Arkham Asylum? To be honest, if anyone took me to a hospital that has got like a fenced gate with the spikes and gargoyles, I probably wouldn't want to go in there. But anyway.
Yeah, yeah. And of course, it is a fantasy. It's designed to be, a gothic horror, look and aesthetic to it. Not to mention, it's a corrupt hospital, lots of. But still, all of that aside, real electroshock therapy is absolutely nothing like that at all. You go to a hospital, you are put under anesthesia, then they do apply shocks, but you're not aware of it, and it doesn't make you jump and scream and all of that kind of stuff. You really, it's not a very interesting to watch because it's just like you push the button and that's that. You do that a couple of times, then you're done. And you do that several times per week for a few weeks. And it's a very effective treatment for severe intractable depression, severe intractable psychotic symptoms. But because of the stigma that is partially encouraged by horror movies and, Batman and all this kind of stuff, it's tough. It's a tough sell sometimes for people because that's what's in their head when you suggest it, not the real thing.
Mm. Interesting. Because I wrote a short story a few years ago, and I sort of wanted to mention that, but I was like, oh, like surely no one does this anymore. Like, just mindful of, yeah, you never know who's going to read you, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So So, okay. The big one, the other one that we see a lot in movies and stuff. Multiple personality disorder, split personality, whatever. Is that really a thing?
Mm-hmm. Yes, it is.
Yeah.
No way. No,
Yeah.
no. Sorry, hang on. Classic. No, and then you go to court and they tried you for murder, but it was my other personality that did it, and you get set free. We've seen that plenty of time in plenty of movies. Really?
Well, okay.
Not
Now,
to that degree, I don't think.
Oh, I'm sorry, what was that?
Not to that degree, I don't think.
No. They take something that is an actual disorder and they crank it up to 11 for dramatic effect. And then they'll I don't remember the name of the movie, but Edward Norton was in it, and he faked multiple personality.
Primal Fear with
Yes, there you go.
Richard
Primal
Gere.
Fear. Yeah.
Great movie.
The level of skill that would be required to be that good at faking it is, well, I mean, you'd have to be Edward Norton. Really. You have to be a professional, like world-class actor level to be able to pull that off. Because, but yeah, what usually happens is that kind of thing will manifest in someone with a long history of severe, usually childhood sexual abuse, and it has to be extreme to elicit that response. And I've seen it's not super common at that degree where they actually have different personalities manifesting that don't have much awareness of each other. Right. So that's it's an extreme of something we all kind of do, actually. We'll have a slightly different personality in different social settings. But, one set of behaviors still remembers the other one from yesterday. In a setting of severe trauma, though, the intensity is so high and the desire to adapt is so strong that the brain basically says that you're going to focus all your energy on adapting to this setting right now. And then when a different setting comes along, you'll shift gears so hard that you'll go to another personality. And this can affect even the physiology. Like there's some cases where like one personality was an insulin dependent diabetic and another one wasn't. This has actually been documented. That level of dissociation is extremely rare. But the less severe kinds of dissociation is actually not that uncommon, especially in the setting of trauma.
Wow, I never believed it. Have you dealt with it?
Yeah, Yeah, I've seen it a couple of times.
Tell us the story.
Well, obviously I don't want to get into too much detail because that would be, patient confidentiality.
No, of course.
I have seen cases of personality shifts where they had blocks of time that they weren't able to account for, and through inference we were able to figure out that on top of the history of trauma that was probably what was going on. And then there was other cases I've seen where people had something very similar to that, which is basically dissociative amnesia, where they had severe traumas and they don't know who they are at all, and they completely lost their autobiographical memory. Very dramatic in that instance, and that's very similar to the dissociative identity disorder that you're talking about.
We have a question for you here from our very good friend Steve from the page 2 in forums, and he's asking, what are signs that adults can look for who think they may have this kind of condition? I hope you're asking for a friend, Steve.
Yeah, asking for a friend. Let's hope. So, generally speaking, it's going to be lapses in memory are going to be your first clue. Lost time. For example, I had a patient who we were able to kind of figure out that this was going on because she would say that there were times where she kind of lost track of like a couple of hours, like she didn't know what was going on. Or then family members would come to her and say, like, what was going on with you yesterday? And they have no memory of what was going on. And always asking for a friend, yeah. So that on top of like wild mood swings, like intense affect, is going to be a history of trauma. Now, if it's to the level that you're dissociating from it, you may not have memory of it. And I've seen that. And once we found out what the trauma was, it's understandable why they wouldn't remember, because the brain basically has this kill switch. You're overloaded trying to process the emotions. You get to a certain point where you're so overloaded that the brain basically has this catastrophic, the nuclear option, where it just says, okay, we're just going to wipe that personality completely and you're going to start from scratch. And that takes a lot.
That's incredible.
Yeah, it's pretty impressive. And in brain scans of people with this, there's actually measurable changes in connectivity in the brain in certain areas. I won't bore the audience with the neuroscience, but yeah.
So would you ever write a book about your cases, or would it be one of those things that people wouldn't believe?
Well, that's a good question. My writing centers around fantasy, and so I use psychology in it, but in a symbolic and metaphorical way. And I do have something sort of like that planned, but it's expressed more in fantastical imagery rather than a literal story.
Mm-hmm.
But it makes for great stories, which is why Hollywood loves to use it. But then, of course, they crank it up to 11. Have you ever seen the movie Split?
That's the final one in a whole series, I think.
It's the second one that you really get into the guy with the split personality. James McAvoy plays a bunch of different personalities, and he does an absolutely incredible job. That kind of dissociation would be pretty rare,
but not impossible.
Not impossible, no. And I know I don't know about treating it as if it were a superpower like she does in the movie, but
wow. No. I'm like, I don't know, Susana. Like when I watch these things, I'm like, can't be true, can't be real.
No, there's a lot of weirdness out there, and the mind is a pretty dark, mysterious place. And you just need to build a good story around it. You can make almost any pathology or personality disorder, cool. You can turn it into a superpower. Just build the right narrative.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I definitely agree with that.
Mm. So thinking back to like the movie Psycho, well, originally the novel by Robert Bloch, but then the movie Psycho, is that like a thing? Again, could that be a real situation?
Well,
I sound so dumb asking these questions, but I don't mind. I'm having a great time. So
yeah. Well, I mean, he was just a serial killer, really, who just had this fixation. I think that movie in particular is better without the explanation at the end that they made Hitchcock stick in there. But just because it's scarier if you don't know why it's happening. It's kind of like Michael Myers is scarier when you don't know why he does what he does.
So you bring it back to like serial killers and stuff again. I've been a teacher for long enough to know that boys and girls are different. And one of the ways,
You know that better than most people.
well, but he comes my bit of sort of observational inference. One of the ways in which men and women are different is women's love for true crime podcasts. My wife is obsessed with those. Like she'd be going around the house cleaning or having a shower or whatever, and there's always some gruesome story in the background. And like, honey, the kids are around. Like they don't need to. So, but anyway, so first part is why is that a thing? Like women that are attracted to serial killers in prison and send them their knickers and crazy shit like that. Like, what's that all about?
Yeah. Well,
I have no idea.
Those are two totally different types of people. Number one, right? The person interested in the crime shows, and then the serial killer groupies.
Yeah.
Very different people.
I don't know. I think there's a thin line there. Again, points on the spectrum. I think they're on the same spectrum.
Actually, that is a great question. I've a lot of people ask me, like, what's up with the crime shows? And there's a lot of women in my life who absolutely love that stuff. I find it interesting, but maybe not to the degree. And I always wonder if part of it is just because that's so different, like that kind of behavior is so different typically. And it's always people that are very nice, like just really sweet, that in my experience, that they enjoy watching that stuff because it's always like the fascination of like, how in the world can you be this way? It's just so fascinating to try to figure out why would they do this stuff. That's part of it. I think another part of it is, how do I avoid these kind of people? Like, how can I be safe? Right? And so obviously women have strong reasons to worry more about being safe than men do, because men are more violent on average. And so there's a whole lot of motivation to consider all of the possible scenarios and like, how might I have avoided this guy, So I think that's part of it. As far as like the groupies go, they're just messed up. Okay. Like I don't know.
Your clinical assessment messed up. Yes.
That's your diagnostic.
Diagnosis. I'm gonna write that down on their chart. I mean, if I had to pose a serious question to it, I think it would. Typically, it's like classically, it would be like a father complex. It would be, I want somebody who's strong and going to be protective of me, and I don't feel adequate, so I'm going to submit to this person. So it tends to be people who have a very low sense of self-worth, and they project the autonomy and everything onto someone else who is going to take care of them. Of course, they tend to be sociopaths or psychopaths when they hook up with each other, and so it's kind of a match made in hell. They've got this person who loves controlling somebody else, and the other person has this kind of masochistic tendency, and so they endure it because then that's better than trying to go out there on their own because they don't feel like they can possibly do that. So that's kind of my 2-second diagnosis of what's going on there.
Yeah, it's great. Sorry, Susana, I don't want to monopolize the conversation, but if you've got anything you want to
I can't relate with either type of woman. So, but then again, a while back, before all the gender issues became more popular, and there was this test online where you would test if you had a man's brain or a female brain. And I had nothing better to do, I guess. And I test, and it came out as 91% male. So clearly, I'm not the best person to talk about why women like what they like.
There you go.
Right.
But the
No,
questions were so, it's just because I don't like cooking, or I'm not good with children, or I don't have kids, and because I like things like outdoor activities and sports and going for hikes, and I don't buy shoes or bags, or so apparently that I don't qualify as a woman.
but I would guess that those are much more kind of societal expectations of behavior rather
Yeah,
than
has
actual
has
the the psyche. Because I think it is clear that women tend to do better in sort of caring, nurturing jobs. I think men we're a bit more rough and tumble. And when my first boy, when he was going to nursery, all the carers at the nursery were obviously, I say obviously, they were all female. And then there was this one guy. And then when they put my son in this with the in this guy's group, even my wife and I were like, oh, he's with the guy. Why is there a guy working at a nursery? Like, what's wrong with him? Like, it's and we were trying to like be open minded, and it was great. The guy was great. He just mastered the kids like the Pied Piper. But I think we do have differences that manifest in behaviors, isn't it?
Oh yeah. Well, the thing is that okay, so men and women have different. It's a statistical bimodal distribution. So that means that along the areas in which males and females differ in terms of psychological predispositions, there's quite a bit of overlap. There are distinct peaks of the distributions, right? But there's a lot of overlap, and it tends to be in things like emotional intelligence. Like women excel on average at that, and um, women tend to think more about or be more interested in people, whereas males tend to be more interested in things. That's a kind of a classic one. Um, but again, there's quite a bit of overlap in this, and the interesting thing about that is if you look at those predispositions and preferences, and you compare it to like the number of people in a particular type of work, for example, watching children, taking care of children, there is still quite a bit of mismatch. In other words, you would expect, given the number of men who would be interested in that kind of work, for there to be more men in that kind of work than there is. So that's the social and cultural component of it that says, oh, men shouldn't be doing that, or they're not good at that.
Mm.
That's not really borne out by the data. And then the same thing you can also say in, say, like engineering. Like there should be more women in engineering. Now, generally, they're not as interested in the engineering as men are. But even if you account for that, there's still not enough. In many countries, anyway.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. I just had the next question in my head. I hate when these things happen. Right. Okay. Here we go. So then, men writing romance. You've written a book, and I think you sort of dealt because every fantasy novel has to have a romance. Part of the tick box. There's a Dark Lord, the Chosen One, the magical artifact, and the romance. I've I've repeated myself many times. I don't think men write good romance.
disagree.
Go on.
I don't know. I mean, there is that perception is there, but I don't know how many romance novels that are out there that are actually written by men using a pseudonym. It could be. I'd be curious to know that, because I think men might be more interested in that than they're willing to admit.
Mm-hmm.
That's just my thought. Now, I mean, half of all novels that are published are romances. That's the genre, right? That's the genre. So there's a humongous demand for it. And of course, women are the ones who primarily read those. but I don't know that I would agree that men just aren't good at that. I think maybe on average they might not be as good as women, but there's probably some out there that are really, really good at it.
Yes, and there's many that read romance as well.
Mhm. Yeah.
For
Yeah, I've read
example,
a few.
Outlander is very popular amongst men.
Hmm. Yeah, I've read a few that my wife suggested to me because she really loved them, and I mean they're really good, right? If you do it right, it's a great story.
Yeah. Steve here seems to think, like me, that when men write romantic scenes, it's pretty bad usually. And he does wonder how many use pet names. And when they write, it's usually smut or dark smut, which I didn't know was a genre.
Dark. I don't even know what that is.
Yeah, no, I
I
think I
need
just learned something new. um, yeah, it's I don't know.
Well, the stereotype that is there is pretty strong, and I think a lot of men would be ashamed to say that they've read one, even if it was kind of like a guilty pleasure for them. So I don't know. I don't know. It's a great
No,
question.
I so like last year over at the page 2 in forum, Steve, shout out. We sort of were engaging in conversation with Johnny Words, with the author, and she threw out like a romance book challenge, and she came up with a list of 5. Sort of, she qualified like really good romance books. And I think Susana and I last year we read what was it called?
Carnal something.
Carnal Innocence.
Innocence, yes.
That's it. That's it. And I did enjoy it, and I think I would try to read at least one a year from Janice's list. But it's not, yeah, it's not something I feel like called to read. But
Mhm.
anyway,
Yeah.
because how did you feel about writing romance yourself, or like the romance elements in your books?
Oh, I really liked it. Actually, I tied it into the theme that I was working with.
Yeah, but you were playing on the whole psychology thing as well in there, so
Mhm.
I think you played it to your strengths, which is obviously
That's
commendable.
what you should do. That's
Yeah,
why
yeah,
I
obviously.
yeah. But
So,
I still enjoy writing that type of stuff. I mean, long term, pair bonding is a very strong element of the psyche, and it tickles the neurotransmitters, right? We can't help it. We care about loving.
yeah,
So I think it's a great idea to put it in there. If it makes sense right now, this obviously sometimes they'll shoehorn it in there and it doesn't make much sense. Like the love triangle in the Hobbit movie, for example, I thought was kind of silly.
yeah,
And that was obviously shoehorned in there
yeah.
because the studio executive said there needs to be a love triangle. So, you know, put it in there.
And because Susanna, you write about gods and themes and the stuff like that. So
Mhm.
uh, how's the romance, or is it that sort of Greek gods romance that wasn't very much romance and more sort of sexual assault, so to speak?
There's a little bit of everything. Yeah, there's it's rough. Yes, but
What, writing or the romance?
the romances they are all a little bit messed up.
Well, it
But
makes for good
there
drama.
are deep connections. No, they are very lust based. I deal with, like Jose said, with gods, and lust plays a bigger role than love in many relationships in my series, unapologetically, because yeah, they are characters with very loose concepts of morality, and they live for eternally, so they get bored, I guess.
um, sorry, go on. Sorry.
Oh, I was just saying that it's the joy of writing. That's why I write fantasy. I don't want to write about everyday romance. About the it's fine, but I like my romance reading and writing in fantasy world, in fantasy settings.
So we've already mentioned a couple of movies and books and so on. So, in your opinion, would you recommend any movies or novels that have got like a good characterization of any of these conditions, or like you mentioned before, they are always cranked to the extreme in order to make it more sensational and appealing?
That's a tough one.
That is a tough one. Well, and a couple of ones that you've mentioned, like psychopathy. I mean, that's like every mustache twirling villain in, you know, every other, you know, or every dark lord in the fantasy, you know, genre.
They are more like narcissists than psychopaths these days.
A lot, yeah,
Our
a
villain
lot of
is a
that.
narcissist.
Yeah, yeah, that's true. With your, like, the popularity of grimdark fantasy, you've got all kinds of character pathology in there that's not necessarily cranked to 11. Like they do try to be realistic. Like Abercrombie's First Law series. I don't know if you're familiar with those. Yeah, I think his characterization was pretty realistic in that.
Hmm.
Yeah,
It's one of my favorite things about the series. It's my favorite series.
I think it was very well done. The moral, everyone's a morally gray character thing, I'm not the hugest fan of myself, but you know, it's definitely, if it's done well, it's great stuff.
Hmm. It's on reflex.
Yeah, sorry for anyone not watching. As soon as you mention Grimdark, Susana does this big eye roll. Anyway, it's
Yeah,
become a thing. Um, that's
it's so
so.
popular right now, and it's like, yeah, enough already. Right? Yeah, I get it.
So, I think sort of final question, because I'm mindful of your time commitments, and once again, I'm really grateful that you can make it today. I'm having a great time. But the Joker in the Batman comics, what is that? And obviously, it's had a lot of different incarnations of the different writers. They've given it different spins on it.
Mm.
But sort of, so if we think about the Jack Nicholson Joker from the 1989 movie.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I mean, he would be, I think, much more like a classic kind of psychopath depiction.
Right.
Whereas, like, say, the Joker in the Dark Knight trilogy, or in the Dark Knight, because he's only in that movie, he's more like an evil philosopher in that. Like, he's trying to prove a point, but I don't think he really gets enjoyment from what he does. I don't know that he gets enjoyment from anything except upending people's preconceived ideas. So, you know, there's that, and then there's the one with Joaquin Phoenix, right? And I don't even know if what happens in that movie is all in his head or not. I mean, I've watched it a couple of times, and I think it's great for that. But he's someone who clearly wanted to be a good guy and then got pushed into being a terrible person.
Right. And sorry, and then because Susanna brought it up, and again, it's another hot topic these days. The whole narcissistic thing, is that actually a condition?
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
and that clearly, I say clearly, as if I knew anything, social media must have had a massive impact on that, right?
Well, there were narcissists before social media, of course, but it provides a platform for people who want endless praise to get it, if they can figure out exactly what, you know, like reality shows, that kind of thing.
But is it one of those things where, like you mentioned before, you've got predisposition, or is it just for, or do you need to have that predisposition to begin with, but it just gets facilitated way more than it did, say, 20, 30 years ago?
Yeah, I think that there's most of the way that we view this is that people have a give me that dopamine, is that people have a genetic predisposition. Then if the certain events transpire in their life that pushes them in the direction, then it'll manifest. And if they don't, then they're protected from those predispositions. So that's kind of the way that we navigate that sticky nature versus nurture dichotomy.
Right.
Now, it must be then, if you've got so many more narcissists out there, and I've read plenty of papers that argue this, that there's more narcissism now than there was, say, 100 years ago, then it's probably cultural. Many elements of our culture encourage that.
Yeah. Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I think so too. It's the same as with I mean, it's a different sort of thing, but autism and all the different conditions along the attention deficit disorder spectrum. That wasn't a condition available when I went to school back in the 80s. You know, we just started a bit awkward, and that was it. And now I'm a teacher. There's not a single classroom where I haven't got one or two diagnosed students with something, some letters after the name that are not MD. And that we must be doing we must be doing something with the environment or the way we eat, or we must be doing something that is triggering all these, I don't know if it's dormant genes or all these predispositions that are getting accentuated.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. Like, there's a lot of things that we do in westernized cultures that doesn't help. There's a lot of disconnection. There's a lot of consumerism, digital media, smartphones. And this is not stuff that I'm complaining about. This is stuff that a lot of researchers are fussing about.
Right. So just to wrap things up, because we've got like a few more minutes, and I don't want to take more of your time. But once again, thank you. What kind of things do you think are, in your opinion, are conducive to sort of a good mental health, for want of a better expression?
Yeah.
What would you recommend people engage in?
I think one of the biggest things that people are lacking, that I see all the time, is just simple social connection, like real face-to-face even. And I mean, over the internet is better than nothing, but it's not as good as real, like, face-to-face. And not just like a romantic partner, everybody talks about that, but I mean like extended friends and family, community, even just spending time out in nature more, which our modern lifestyle is very different from the way our bodies and our brains evolved, the setting that it evolved in. And our brains and our bodies don't know that they're not in the Stone Age anymore. And so they encounter this completely artificial setting where everyone's disconnected from each other socially, compared to like hunter-gatherers, for example, and live indoors in artificial settings with artificial lighting all the time. See what I'm saying? That's a big contributor, I think, to a lot of this. So reconnecting to that, trying to find meaning, safety, connection. Those are all things that I talk about a lot on my channel, for example, as like recommendations, things that people can do.
So this is something I've wondered myself, because I obviously, and sorry again for people that have listened or heard me say this before, I live in a small town on the east coast of Spain. Find it difficult to find people to talk about grim dark and mental health in storytelling and all that sort of thing. And for me, I don't know if YouTube or what we're doing now is social media, but certainly the online community that Steve founded there, Page 2 in, that has facilitated me meeting people like Susana, Steve, a whole lot of people. I totally agree with what you said, that meeting face to face, nothing beats that. But could this kind of thing be a second best, or or an almost as good as?
Yeah, I think so. I think so. And there's even a debate because there's a whole lot of telemedicine now in psychiatry, where we're treating patients that we're not in the same county or the same state even sometimes. And the debate is like, okay, is that as good? Like, is therapy that way as good? And it's pros and cons. It's not clear. I mean, I think the way you put it is the best. It's a good second. If it's not as good as, it's certainly way better than the alternative, which is nothing. I mean, that's really
or
bad.
just one-sided, because this way, even though we have the camera, we have the screen, but there's a a real time back and forth. We are interacting with each other. We are not just performing, sending a video, and then the feedback comes after. You know, from people that you don't see. You only see what they're reading. You don't see their immediate reaction. So everything is disconnected.
So next time I go to Ireland, Jose, you need to come up there and we'll all go to a pub and have a conversation like this.
Yeah, there's one just down the road.
It's Ireland, of course. There's one just down the road.
I hold you to that. I hold you to that. Obviously, we are in touch, so let's make it happen. I'm all up for it. I'm all up for it. It's been an absolute joy and a pleasure talking to you tonight again. So before we go, where can people find you and your work?
Well, for me, you can go to ericgoodwyn.com. It's super easy. Spelled with a K and a Y.
And your YouTube channel?
Yeah, the Imaginarium is my YouTube channel.
Fantastic. And Susana?
You can find my books pretty much anywhere. The obvious place is Amazon. Timelessness series. First book is Weird Gods. And I also run a tiny YouTube channel called Den of the Weird.
Brilliant stuff. Well, I think we sort of more just, sticking to the time schedule. So that has been absolutely fantastic. Thank you once again to both of you. Thank you to Steve and whoever else was lurking in the chat that didn't say hello. I hope you enjoyed it. I certainly had a great time. So thank you very much, everyone. Take lots of care and we'll see you soon. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.